Hey guys, welcome to Triangle School. I'm Josh Moody. I got my buddy Mike here, and today we're going to be looking at the mousetrap system from top of side control. That's your Americana, your Kimura, and your straight arm lock. Check it out, because it's a zany action, it's a crazy contraption. The fun is catching his arm. Yeah. Alright, on your back, head facing there. So, I started a good side control, guys. That means that one of my knees is blocking his hip. My knee's right about on his belt line, right where his butt cheeks start. Okay? My other knee, I want it to be pretty close to his head. What that does, it gives me a nice wide base and it lets me drop my hips down to my heels. Okay? The closer my knees get together, the higher you'll see my posture become. I slide my knees down wide, and you start to see me able to get lower and lower and lower. Now I want to swim inside of that arm that's closer to me. I swim inside of it, and I come behind his head with a cross face. My other arm's going to come under his armpit. I'm going to put my chest on his chest, and I'm going to lock my hands right behind his shoulder. The hand behind the head is palm down. Okay? Now, a good grappler is not going to want me to have pressure here. He's going to try and build some frames. Go ahead. Frame, Mike, frame. So he's got a frame on my throat. I can't put weight down. Maybe he's grabbing my shoulder and he can pick his elbow up and, oh, that's nasty. So I'm going to unlock my hands. I'm going to grab his shoulder and I'm going to drive my right shoulder into his elbow. As I bring my head forwards. I want his elbow to hit the floor there. If I just drive straight forward, his elbow doesn't hit the floor. I got to give it like a little shrug. So I start with my shoulder into his elbow. My shoulder drives into his elbow. Once his elbow gets to the mat, I pull out my cross face, and I'm going to grab his wrist and pin it to the floor. Okay, I pin his wrist to the floor. My elbow goes to the floor by his ear. My other hand is going to grab my wrist. Now I'm going to pull his elbow to his rib cage to lock out his arm. I don't just want to try and pick his elbow up right here. There's too much play. It's too easy for him to move. What I want to do is I want to lock out his shoulder, so I drag his elbow down to his rib cage. But I don't suck it in. I don't want his hand coming close. I want his hand to stay far away. I want to leave this at 90 degrees. I suck his elbow down to his rib cage. I curl both of my wrists down. I'm going to pick his elbow up. And if that isn't enough, I'll begin to paint the ground with the back of his hand. Okay, I pick his elbow up and I paint the ground. After I bring his elbow to his rib cage, I curl my wrist, I pick his elbow up, and I start to paint the ground. And that's your Americana. So, I'm in side control. He frames on my throat, so I grab his shoulder. That's going to stabilize his arm. I don't want his arm to be able to move all willy-nilly. I stabilize his arm so that when I drive my shoulder into his elbow, there's nowhere, his shoulder can't compensate for the pressure. I drive my shoulder into his elbow, rolling his elbow to the ground. I sneak in front of my face. I grab his wrist, and I drive my elbow to the floor. I'm going to grab my own wrist. I pull his elbow down to his ribs. You see him squirming already? That already got tight. Out here, I start pulling, he's okay. When I start to pull his elbow down, his whole body reacts because of that tension. He doesn't like it. I curl my wrists. I start to slowly pick his elbow up. And you see how much higher I can continue to pick my elbow up? So, Mike frames on my face. I grab his shoulder. I drive my shoulder into his elbow to drive his elbow to the mat. I go for my Americana, and Mike's like, hell no, I ain't getting tapped by no Americana, and he straightens his arm out. I'm bringing my head forwards over his wrist. I'm going to connect my elbow to his elbow. Okay, so I'm hugging his arm with my elbow in my chest here. He straightens. I bring my head to his wrist. I connect my elbow to his elbow. I'm grabbing my own bicep here. And now I'm going to start to push his hand to the floor. If his thumb turns towards his face, I'm going to have to push his hand towards his hip. If his thumb turns towards his hip, we're going to switch grips. Okay, so I'll keep this still super tight. My elbows will come together, and I'll hop my right elbow in front of my left elbow. Now I can switch my hands, so my left hand is grabbing my right bicep, and my right hand is grabbing his wrist. And then I push his wrist towards his head for the break. His thumb goes to the sky. I'm okay. I push straight down. His thumb goes back towards his head. I bring my elbows together. I hop my left elbow in front of my right elbow, keeping this all super tight, making sure I'm pushing my chest into it. I pull my left arm back. I grab his wrist, and I grab my right bicep. My head stays over his wrist, and I start to push his hand towards his hips. So I've got Mike in side control. He frames on my throat, so I grab his shoulder. I drive my shoulder into his elbow until his elbow hits the floor. Once his elbow gets to the floor, I pull out my cross face, and I start looking for my Americana. But he's smart, and he doesn't let me. Oh, snap. If I try and stay back here, I won't have the leverage. I can't keep his shoulder down. I'm just not in a good position. So I bring my head over his wrist. My elbow goes to his elbow. My right hand grabs my left bicep. My left hand grabs his wrist. And I'm going to begin to push his hand away from his thumb. So I'm in side control, and Mike frames on my throat. Pull the shoulder. Shrug my shoulder. Drive his elbow open, and I start to lock up my Americana. Now, I go for my Americana, and he doesn't like it, so he straightens his arm out. Oh, no! But he continues. He doesn't just straighten it out. He turns all the way to the bottom. Now how am I going to hit him with an Americana or an arm bar? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my grip. I hug super tight. I bring my right elbow, and it hops in front of my left elbow. I pull my right arm out, and I grab his wrist. Okay? So now my left arm is underneath his left elbow. My right elbow is on the floor by his left rib cage. My right hand is grabbing his left wrist. And I'm going to start to walk my hips to step over his head. Okay, I want my hips over his head, and I want my head over his hips. Actually, I lied. I want my hips over his shoulder. So I'm going to spread my base wide. I'm going to bring my head to his head. I'm going to slide my elbow to his elbow, and I'm going to begin to pull my left elbow in a circle. Okay? I'm not trying to push my arms. Look at how much his arm starts to go. I'm going to keep his hand on the floor, and I'm going to pull my left elbow. I lock his shoulder out. I drive his elbow to the mat. I try and lock up my Americana, but he drives all the way down. Snap. I bring my elbows together. I switch my elbows to peel that open. Look, I'll sneak inside of his wrist. I'm going to grab his wrist. I'm going to grab my wrist. Now I'm going to turn my hips and begin to walk so I can step over his head and spread my legs out. I'm going to keep his hand on the floor. I'm going to keep my elbow on the floor. My left elbow is going to slide down to his elbow, and I'm going to pull my elbow in a circle. So one last time, I grab his shoulder. I pull it in to stabilize it. I use my right shoulder to drive his elbow to the mat. and I start looking for my Americana, he straightens his arm out. That gives me that straight arm bar. And then he bends it towards his hips, and that gives me the Kimura. And you want to know one of the coolest things about the mousetrap? Is that if I'm over here and I'm looking for this Kimura, we can restart the whole program. He can just straighten his arm out. And then I got to go and I got to try and finish it from right here. And then he turns his arm up, and I switch my elbows back. And I go right back to my Americana, and he straightens his arm out. And I go and I attack it there, and then he straightens it, brings it to the other side, and I switch my elbows, and I go right back to my Kimura. So your mousetrap is this never-ending loop of being able to tear his shoulder to pieces, and sometimes his elbow.